WLRN Video presents.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to another WLRN podcast. I'm Thistle Pettersen, and my guest today is Nevline. Hey, Nevline.
Hi.
Welcome to the show. So I'm going to just read a little bit about Nevline, and then I'm going to hand it over to her, and she's going to introduce herself. Nevline is a writer, filmmaker, and dancer from the United States. She's the producer of the award-winning documentary Reflections Unheard, Black Women in Civil Rights, and the author of several memoirs. Nevline is also the author of her blog, where she regularly publishes essays, videos, and podcasts, sharing her personal journey with healing and creativity, as well as well-researched critiques on gender ideology, yes, as it impacts Black women, including herself. So welcome, Nevline. Can you please introduce yourself to our listeners? Where are you from, and how did you get interested in researching Black women figures in general and Pauli Murray in particular?
Hi, Thistle. Thank you so much for having me, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So my name is Nevline. I am a multidisciplinary artist and wellness practitioner, and I'm also the author of my own blog, Nevline, written the stylized way, where I write, of course, essays about my personal life, my creative and healing journey, and how gender ideology impacts myself and other Black women, lesbians, detrans women, but definitely infusing the Black female perspective. So where else do I start?
Where are you from? Because today we're focusing on Pauli Murray and the article that you just released, and it's timely because it's recently, in recent years, she's been trans. And
Yes.
this is, our listeners may not know who Pauli Murray is, and you wrote this very in-depth article using primary sources, going to a library in Harvard. So where are you from? How did you get the resources to go to the Harvard Library and do this? You're an academic, you're not working for a university, but yet you're doing this really important research because the whole world, and especially the academic world even, is transing these figures from the past, and Pauli Murray is one of them.
Yeah, thank you. That's very important. I think so. As far as how I got started, in terms of researching Black women, that was over a decade ago. So my first major arts project that a lot of people know me for is my film, Reflections Unheard, Black Women in Civil Rights. And that film is a feature-length documentary that highlights Black women's marginalization between the Black power and feminist movements of the 60s and 70s, as well as the Black and women of color-led movements that resulted from that. And so that film is actually done well in the academic sphere. It's in most libraries in the English speaking. And that's how I started. That was in my early 20s. I started that project when I was 20 years old, when I was still in school. And it was not a school project. My school was not like the kind of space that would necessarily like support. I mean, yeah, I didn't really have that kind of. I kept it kind of underground, under wraps, and it was like more my personal project for a while. But that's how I got started. That was a very, very heavily research intensive film. And I think that's where I learned a lot of research skills that came into play for this project about Pauli Murray. I just knew what to do, even though I haven't done a project like that in a long time. I knew how to do it. And as far as this project and how I got resources to do it, I am from Massachusetts. I'm from Western Massachusetts. And believe it or not, I mean, so thankfully, I'm lucky because I live near Harvard. Um, kind of. A lot of people think that the whole of Massachusetts is Boston, but it does take resources still, and it's kind of a pain in the ass to travel to Boston, honestly, from here. But I am also a cat sitter. So I just found a cat sitting opportunity that was able to take me to where I need to go. I actually wrote about my process, my entire process of how I did this. It's not something that I heavily advertise because there were some personal things that, some personal roadblocks that got in the way on my journey to creating this, but I did write about that process in depth on my blog as well, right before I released the piece. And I talked about, the obstacles that I overcame. I actually applied for a grant. I was in the process of applying for a grant, and it didn't go through for some reasons, not Harvard's fault, but, and I wanted to apply for get the funding to go and research there. So there was a whole process. It's not like
Did the grant not go through because they were worried you were transphobic?
no, that's oh actually it was I was in the process of applying. I was working really hard on my application. Harvard actually encouraged me to apply because I wanted to make sure that, they were like they were like, we need PhD equivalent. I'm like, well, I have this film. Is this okay? They were like, yes, please apply. So it wasn't on their end, at least not at that stage. I didn't even get to apply because the woman who I reached out to for a recommendation letter didn't end up. She didn't respond to me. She saw my proposal and she just didn't respond. So I didn't end up getting any recommendation letter, and that was the
And
only
how
reason.
did you know her, that woman?
Yeah, yeah. I can't really say too much about it here, just because, I don't want to expose people's names or anything, but I did write about it. But this is, a woman who knew of my work within the gender critical sphere and who had supported me in the past or said that she supported me. So,
So, in other words, you suspect, but you don't know, that you were unable to apply for this grant because people are afraid that to give you the opportunity because they're afraid you're saying the wrong speak about trans. Is that kind of in a nutshell?
not from her. Not from the woman I reached out to. I'm just
Uh-huh.
saying that that's the reason why I wasn't able to apply for the grant. But in the end, so I didn't even get to see if Harvard would reject me or not. I'm just talking about how did I get the resources. It was a process, and then I came across an opportunity to do cat sitting, which I also do professionally here and there. And I got this amazing opportunity to cat sit in an artist loft that was close to Harvard. And so that was kind of my free-ish ticket
I
to,
love that. You know, WLRN is all about DIY media that's high quality, and your article is very well researched, very well thought out, and should be included in class syllabi that are discussing Black women civil rights activists. And, in academia, it should be included in academic settings. Um,
right. Thank you.
it's that good. And I and yet we are seeing censorship in academia. And what you're describing is like a serious lack of opportunities for women and Black women to apply for scholarships based on your critical thought and your beliefs. And that's a really awful form of discrimination, but yet, like a weed growing up through the cracks in the concrete, you're doing this grassroots as a volunteer, finding a cat sit. So, like having proximity. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's It's fantastic, Nevlin. Like that's who does that? Like
I don't
people
know.
because I remember when I took a feminist theory class at the University of Michigan when I was in graduate school, and my Black woman professor, it was an interdisciplinary class with women from all over, all graduate students from all over the university, all these different departments. And the teacher said, I'm here because I love knowledge and I love conversation and I love theory and philosophical discussions. And I was like, cool, that's why I'm here too. And that was like this was back in like 1997. And that was like and it was before queer theory had completely killed feminism in academia. Because this was the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, so obviously it's like Trans Central Queer Theory USA now, but I don't know, I'm getting off on a tangent, but I just find your project looking at Pauli Murray. It is an academic project that you did as a grassroots organizer and activist because you believe it's important. And from that passion that professor was coming from, that should be in academia. Why do you go to study the world, sociology or literature, looking at the world through literature or art? You do it to understand, to have knowledge, to have conversations, to ponder, to wonder. Like, you
Yeah.
don't do it to control and mutilate kids, and like speak revisionist histories that are not true about people like Pauli Murray can. All right, so that segues into this question, which is who was Pauli Murray and what were some of her noteworthy achievements? And why are people beginning to talk about her and notice her now?
So Pauli Murray was a Black female writer, legal scholar, poet, activist, and Episcopal priest who was most active from the 1930s through the time of her death in 1985. Um, she was a woman of so many accomplishments. I can't really begin to list them all. Um, but I would say to sum it up, she just broke barriers for what was allowed or expected of a Black woman during her time, um, especially in the educational realm and also in her profession later on. But she broke a lot of barriers in education from a young age. Um, she was the top graduate in her class at Howard University, which was all Black male at the time. She was the only woman in her class.
Was
And
this in the
also,
1940s, 1950s?
I believe that was in early 1940s, um, from what I can recall. And um, also, she was one of the first women to be accepted into Harvard University, which initially rejected her based on her sex. And she continued to advocate. That's the other thing is that about Pauli Murray is that when you look at her papers, she had all this fierce advocacy, and she was very persistent when she wanted something, um, which you can also later see in her medical records, unfortunately. But anything that she wanted and believed in, she really advocated for herself and also on behalf of, well, really blazing the trail for other women, other Black women of her time, um, really setting us all free. So, and of course, she was also the first African American woman um, to be ordained as an Episcopal priest. I mean, she had many accomplishments.
Yeah, and why do you think people are noticing her now?
Um, it's funny because A lot of people have reached out to me since I wrote this and said that they didn't know who Pauli Murray was at all. I knew about Pauli Murray in passing because of my research on Black women in civil rights, although I did not focus or include Pauli Murray in my film because the eras didn't line up for what I was focusing on, right? So, but I knew a little bit about her, and I knew that she was a very important figure, and she's not often talked about she's kind of, some people might talk about her, but some people may not. She's not a Rosa Parks, right? Why she's being focused on right now is because people have found a way, and by people I mean major institutions, organizations, activists, I mean, mostly scholars. I won't even say that grassroots activists even started this. It was scholars as well, have dug up her papers in Harvard specifically. And they found her medical records, which outlined her struggle with her sexuality, although that's not what it is called. That's how they describe it. They don't ever talk about her struggle with her sexuality. They straight to that she wanted testosterone and that she is trans. So they have decided to rebrand her as transgender, as a transgender man, or a non-binary figure, or both, or transsexual. They have changed her pronouns. They found a way to revive her history and recontextualize it and sell it as this new thing that fits into another popular thing that's coming out.
What you did in this article is you went to those same resources that these genderists are using to trans Pauli Murray, and you examined them with your eyes to see firsthand what she was talking about and how she was saying it and how it fits into the trans narrative, you know. How does what she's talking about fit into the contemporary trans narrative, so much so that these queer theorists, these queer scholars feel like they can declare that she was transgender or non-binary?
How does I'm sorry, just to clarify your question, how does her records fit into the trans narrative such
Yes,
that?
how do the records that you examined with your own eyes, like how do you see them
Yeah,
overlapping with what it means to be trans in today's world and terms? You really go into the details in your article, but if you could just briefly talk about that.
yeah. Well, I mean, when she was in her late 20s, she went to a psychiatrist. Well, first of all, she found a newspaper clipping um, that that lined a new experiment with testosterone. Now, that experiment was being done on gay men. It was openly advertised as conversion therapy, as a successful conversion therapy tool. And she took an interest in that, and she fiercely advocated for herself so that she could have access to testosterone, because she felt that she speculated based on her gender nonconformity, meaning the way that she behaved, the way that she dressed, and the fact that she loved women and she was a homosexual woman. She speculated that she was actually a man, or that she may have male organs actually. And so that was the beginning of a journey of trying to figure out if she's a biological male. Um,
Amazing, because that really does sound like a lot of trans narratives that I hear, you know?
it doesn't, I distinguish her journey from transgenderism in the essay, just because transgender is not about your biology. It's about your identity, regardless of your biology. She had a questioning period, genuinely questioning whether or not she was actually male, based on how well she fit into the male gender stereotype. It was genuine. And so it wasn't like, oh, I'm a female, but I want to be male anyway. Or I know that I'm a woman, I want to be a man anyway. You know, it was not identity.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So I'm getting back to the questions in your article that we're discussing, that's called "How the Trans Movement is Erasing Black Women from History: Setting the Record Straight About Pauli Murray," which we can find. It's on your blog, and that URL will be in the description beneath this podcast. You point out that her colleagues during her career were largely men, and that she was attracted to white, pretty, straight women, and fulfilling that gender role in a way of being the man, you know. Why did you put straight in quotes for about the women that she was attracted to? And then can you also expand upon why you think those types of women were her type, and what being in a largely white male environment during this time period did to her psyche?
Yeah, I thought that's a great question. I I put straight in quotes because I'm just like, if you're are you really straight if you're running around with Pauli Murray? And that literally that's all it was. And I don't I you're probably not straight. I think that there's a lot of straight identified women who are actually bisexual. Definitely some who identify straight but might even be lesbians. Um, so that's why I said that. And if the women that she was with were genuinely more male attracted, if they were, you know, running around with Pauli Murray in the way that they did, I would at least think that they're bi.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. And on as far as why I felt like what influenced her attractions to those women, the first intuitive thought that came to mind was just colorism. Was that this is who you think of as beautiful, and who you um, who you want to partner. These are pretty girls to you, and this is common. I mean, we see this dynamic with um, masculine people. I will say masculine people, meaning could be the a more masculine presenting counterpart in a lesbian relationship, or it could be a man with a woman. Um, you know, the darker skinned or black counterpart is usually with lighter skin or white counterpart because of beauty standards. This is very common and more common than the opposite. So yeah, that was the first thing that came to mind. Where does that come from? Obviously, it comes from the society that we live in.
And she was surrounded by white, straight men as her colleagues. So, what did that do to her, and how her self-image, as this woman who's breaking gender norms and also race norms? How did that impact her self-image?
I mean, I think it's funny that you mentioned that because I never really thought about the actual day-to-day impact of being surrounded by white straight men having such a direct impact on her attractions. Um, I'm not saying that it didn't. Maybe it did. Um, but I think that it didn't have to come from that. It could have just come from society. Like just the world that she lived in. She could have been surrounded by a Black community and still, if she had the opportunity to be with white women, maybe that's what she would have preferred. I know that there's Black men who, um, if they had the opportunity to be with a woman that they would prefer, that's what they consider to be a prize. So that's how I thought of it, is that that's what's the opportunity that was offered through her professional advancement and her educational advancement. And that's what she preferred. But, uh, yeah, basically just that. I think I had another thought, but it's escaping me right now. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I just, think that she was breaking a lot of norms. And I have friends who are female that are surrounded by white straight men in their places of employment, and they're breaking these gender norms. And in a sense, when they're in that environment, they kind of try to be one of the guys, in a way. Um, just to be socially accepted.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that was at play, but I did note that in her career, those were her peers, and how unusual that is for a Black woman. Um,
Yeah.
so Murray's, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, like, her peers at certain points were also um Black men and white women as well. I mean, she organized and worked with a lot of different kinds of people, but it wasn't um exclusively white. I mean, she was usually the only one of her kind, like a minority, with all the different social positionings that she occupied, overlapping, like being Black woman. Um, but, you know, it's not to say that she didn't have, I mean, I think that even if you're surrounded by Black men, you could still have that influence because beauty norms are still the same regardless. They're still applied to the Black community regardless. Does
Mhm.
that make sense?
Yeah, and then also, I mean, I'm speaking specifically of when she's going to Harvard, and
Mhm.
then because she got a law degree, am I correct?
Yes.
And and then in practicing law too, she was mostly around white men, right? At Harvard especially, like they first wouldn't let her in because she was female, and I would assume there were very very few females there at the time.
Yeah, that's true. But it seemed that from based on her records that she developed, she had this inclination before she even was accepted into Harvard. Like I talked about her relationship with Peggy, and
Mhm.
that predates her acceptance into Harvard.
Yeah, um, exactly. And so I'm not trying to like make a sweeping statement that her sexuality was influenced by her time surrounded by these white men, when she was going to school, that it's the larger society in general, and our beauty standards, a lot of the same ones that we have today, unfortunately, like Barbie and all of that, Marilyn Monroe, these beauty standards that we have, that influence all of us, whatever um, station we may hold in society. But moving along to the next question, this one I'm interested in because you always get like oh, well, it's not really harming anyone that this person, wants to be referred to in this way, and I'm just gonna like make them feel good about themselves, and it's just a small thing. It's just being polite, you know what I mean? And so anyway, and that's how I feel like Rosita Stevens Holsey, Murray's niece, um, is about the whole phenomenon of transing, just really making it's not a big deal. I'm always going to think of her as a woman, but I understand that this community, our community, is large and expansive these days. Just using a lot of that be kind sort of speak.
Yeah.
And like how can we make people see that it's not harmless when Pauli Murray's niece is running around saying, oh, it's fine to trans her? I'll always look at her like she's a woman and use she, her pronouns, but if you all want to trans her, that's just fine.
Yeah, I mean, I know that you sent me the radio interview with Rosita, and I was really happy to receive that because I also wondered what her stance was on this, aside from knowing that she refers to Pauli Murray, her aunt, as a woman, and hasn't really shaken with that, you know. I I mean, your question is, how do we get people to understand that this is harmful?
Yeah, that her aunt, or I mean her niece, sorry, in this interview on, just as an aside, on WORT 89.9 FM, the radio station in Madison, a community public access radio station that banned me for interviewing lesbian feminist scholar Sheila Jeffreys because of her stance on transgenderism, and being gender critical. That radio station, they feel like it's necessary. There's always like a hats off to the trans community. It's always, you can never just talk about women. You have to talk about women and trans,
Okay.
women and trans and non-binary. Um, and so Pauli Murray's niece being interviewed, you just have to, it's obligatory. You have to ask the question. And her response on WORT was to just be like, "Oh, it's not a big deal. I see her as a woman, but I understand that the trans queer community is large and expansive, and that they want to embrace my aunt as one of their people, and that's fine." So my question is, why is that not fine?
Well, in my essay, it was very important for me to um, not only get people to see that um, this assumption and this rewriting of Pauli Murray is incorrect, that it's historically inaccurate, that it's out of integrity um, with best practices for historians, um,
Right.
applying modern day ideologies, diagnoses to someone from the past. I mean, that's out of integrity, right? I wanted to make that clear, but I also wanted to. The article is designed for someone um, who is not well versed in these issues, but who may have come across this piece by virtue of like adjacent issues, like maybe somebody's researching Pauli Murray, or maybe somebody wants to know um, the history, like just something like that, for somebody who comes across the piece to learn. And so it's designed to walk them through a critical thinking process about what it means to be trans in the first place. What is this? What does this mean? Because the thing is that nobody ever questions what it is. Everyone, and everyone, including myself, like I have had, even though I've never been brainwashed, right? I have gone through a process of understanding and also researching and learning about what actually is what actually this is. And many people believe that, you know, being trans is this innate sort of thing, that someone is born this way, that, you know, we have pink brains and blue brains, female brains and male brains, and, you know, that, you know, somebody can be born with a different brain. Like people have these kind of different kinds of woo-woo ideas about what this means. And I wanted to make it clear what it actually is and what these definitions are. And is there a definition? No, there is not. This is why this is possible.
Let me just read a line from your article that I think sums up what you're saying so well. It says transness is seen as being fixed and innate, and in other cases, it's seen as being fluid. That's because there is no standard concept or definition of being trans. It is whatever people want it to be when they want it to be that thing. I suppose this is convenient when you're revising history.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, can you explain further why these places and books that are supposedly honoring Murray, you know, like her niece loves her so much, right? I mean, she had like 44 years with her, I think she was saying, and looked up to her, has all these childhood memories, um, and she's doing a preservation society for Pauli Murray online, and yet, so she's trying to keep her legacy alive, but they're actually damaging our understanding of who she was and what she represents for us, you know.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um,
It's so important to preserve women's history. I mean, even outside of the whole questioning around transness or calling people trans, right? Outside of that, already, where there's so much erasure of women's contributions to history, and we all know that. Um, and we'll never fully know the extent, but there have been women behind so many inventions, so many books, so many publications that men took credit for, right? Men have taken credit for women's creations for many, many years. And I mean, that's an understatement. And so why are we, I mean, I think that it's common knowledge for the average progressive person that, you know, to acknowledge that this is wrong. Why are we further contributing to it through this? It's just another way of doing it.
it's because the left and the right and everyone is misogynistic, you know, like it's just it's being revealed through transness. And see, like transgenderism makes it seem like it's progressive because they're not really men. It's not really men, they're actually women, you know. And so I don't know, it's just a very confusing ideology, and I think you do a good job of unveiling that in your article. Let's talk about how Polly saw herself. I think in your article you also spoke that, you know, this period of questioning lasted about 10 years in her very, very long life, where she was wanting to experiment with testosterone, which she never ended up doing. Um, and then she just became accepting herself as a woman and always saw herself as a woman. And not only that, in your article, you say Polly spoke of herself and her life's work as a Negro woman. She said her greatest accomplishment as a Negro woman in America was that she survived. This was her final word about herself. So this was later on in life, and the legacy that she wanted to leave for the world. How do you think we can make sure that that history books represent her as she was? What kind of activism can you encourage our listeners to get involved in so that Pauli Murray is detransed and accurately, you know, represented in libraries and academia out there in the world?
Specifically about Pauli Murray, share the essay. Share the essay. I did the work. I laid it out. It's clean. It's easy to understand. I'm the only person who has done that. Share the essay with people, and because it's designed to be brought to different communities. I did not write it just so that a certain few people who already understand these issues can understand, and then we can all have an echo chamber. I wrote it so that the average person, you know, can be able to understand these concepts if they have the vocabulary.
And the average professor at universities who may be thinking, you know what, I really am getting sick of this gender ideology crap, and I'm sick of being silent. And I need this type of research to be done, but I haven't done it myself, but maybe I can slip this into my syllabus, you know? Um,
Yeah,
it is. It's good. It's well researched, and we need to counter the revisionist history that is out there, and it's so important to do that. That's why I feel like your motivation is different than like getting a paycheck. Like you're seeing that this is a need that needs to be fulfilled. We need to get this real history out there, so that it doesn't get erased, so that she doesn't get completely erased. Because what happens
yeah,
after her niece dies, you know, and so she's no longer around to see her as a woman. Because in doing research for this interview, I actually came across, maybe on a website that you sent, or on some website, there was a trans activist who was saying, oh, we don't like Rosita because she still refers to Pauli as a woman, you know, and that's sad when relatives are referring to her as a woman because they're not getting with the times, and like how Pauli was actually, you know, not a woman, and stuff. And I was like, oh my God, well, so when the niece dies, like, you know, you can just see how it's just going to get buried more and more and more and more. And that's why this essay is so important and needs to get into the hands of everyone who cares about real history.
yeah. I can appreciate that. And I mean, it's not only just, her niece. I mean, there are other people. I mean, the Schlesinger Library, um, notes in there somewhere in their online archive that, you know, we understand that some scholars choose to refer to Murray using other pronouns, but we choose not to refer to her using any terminology that she did not use herself, that she did not refer to. And I felt like that was a solid stance. I felt like there, it's easy to do. I mean, it's not even like you have to position to get canceled, right? But this is Pauli Murray asked for her papers to be in the Schlesinger Library. The Schlesinger Library at Harvard is a women's history library. This was an end of life thing. This is an end of life, request. And so she's her papers are stored in a women's history library, you guys. I mean, they're not in a, if you really, just anyway, get me started. But I mean, yeah, unfortunately, I think that her niece, you know, a lot of people, if they're not like super brainwashed trans rights activists, they have the live and let live kind of attitude about it, or they have a really, really soft stance about it, even if they are like kind of like, you know, like, no, this is wrong. Some people might be like, ah, that's wrong, but it's not, they don't really see like the whole picture of it, of why it's wrong. And I think that that has a lot to do with education. Um, I think that most people are really shielded from, um, I mean, there's so much censorship, and there's a reason why. It's because, all of the journalists, the writers, the media makers who are creating work that keep this narrative in different ways. you know, are suppressed, and are not visible. So when you research Pauli Murray and when you want to find another perspective, you have to be extremely intentional about what you're searching for, because you're not going to find it on Google. You're not going to find it on the first page. Everything is super biased about her, and everything is spouting the you know the one trans narrative about her, right? Or
So,
they
so share the article, listeners, far and wide. Use it as fodder for discussions around the dinner table, with friends and family. It's it's very well written and something that is needed in today's world with all the censorship that's happening. At the end of your article, you say the definition of a woman is an adult human female, which is clearly a hats off to Posey Parker. Are you a fan?
yeah, I mean, I respect Posey Parker. I don't follow her super closely, but I do respect what she's doing.
Awesome. And I love that. A woman is an adult human female. It just sums it up, Women are women no matter how we dress, who we love, how we walk or talk, or what we like to do in our spare time. I envision a world that allows non-conforming people to feel that we have a place on this planet without having to stuff ourselves into a box we will never fit. Real inclusivity doesn't demand us to change the definition of man or woman or to change certain people to fit inside of it. It simply accepts and embraces those who are already there. Can you explain what you mean by these final words?
Yeah, we have definitions of man and woman based on our biology. We have all had these definitions. They transcend language. I mean, on a human level, we understand the differences between us based on biological sex. And there are people um, who are, based on their behavior, maybe even sometimes the way that they look or present, they might um, they might belong to one biological sex, but they might, have certain behaviors or dress or style or mannerisms that are more commonly found in the opposite sex. And that is just a natural human variation. Um, and homosexuality is a natural human variation. And that does not mean that those people should change or believe that they're wrong or backwards or that they were born in the wrong body or that there's something other than what they are. You're still, you know, what you are. You're still a female. You just happen to be butch or masculine or a lesbian, and you shouldn't try to change yourself to fit into any sort of norm. And we should respect that and not police these people and try to make them identify something else.
Right on. And you can have style and dress the way that you want to dress, and it doesn't change your biological sex. You know, I mean, we can express ourselves and our personalities through how we present, but it doesn't change our biological sex. And I just feel like, how did we ever get into this place where people thought it's crazy? But your study of Pauli Murray really, because she did question if she actually was biologically male. And that, I think that's fascinating because we do this transgenderism has at its root, it has patriarchy, which she grew up in patriarchy. She grew in, things have changed, but really how much has changed, and I think your article really revealed that the connection between transgenderism and the already existing gender norms and patriarchy that she grew up in and lived in, and that we are growing up and living in as well.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Nevline. This was fantastic to have you on WLRN's airwaves. So I'm just gonna say goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that chat between Thistle Pettersen and Nevline. If you like what you're hearing and would like to donate to the cause of feminist community radio, please visit our website, WLRNmedia.com. If you're interested in joining our team, we are always looking for new volunteers to conduct interviews, write blog posts, post to our Facebook and other social media pages, and edit videos like this one.